Everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm super excited to share with you all my haul of the Divine Blush collection from Pat McGrath. So last week I filmed my initial impressions of this collection with the video dedicated to the Nude Venus shade, which just happened to be available on Sephora before the Sephora launch. But I had actually picked up 3 blushes the moment they dropped on Pat McGrath's website. So I bought Electric Bloom, Divine Rose, and Desert Orchid. So today they finally came in the mail, so I'm really excited to share with you all swatches, comparison swatches, and also demos of all of these blushes. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about the Divine Blush collection, then just stick around. So before we dive into the swatches, I just wanted to quickly go over the packaging for these blushes. So all of them come in these beautiful lilac boxes. And then the blushes themselves are in Pat McGrath's black lacquer packaging. They each have a nice mirror and this beautiful embossment with roses and sun rays. So this one over here is Electric Bloom, which is described as a vivid coral demi-matte. Then we have Divine Rose, which is a cool mauve rose demi-matte. And here is Desert Orchid, a bronze rose with golden pearl. And finally, Nude Venus, a peachy pink with golden pearl. So as you can see, there are 2 different finishes that these blushes come in. One which is a demi-matte, and then the other which is more of a shimmery satin pearl finish. And if you guys watched my Nude Venus video, you know that I really loved that blush. So I'm really excited today to try out the demi-matte formula and also these different shades. So here we have the 4 shades swatched, starting with Nude Venus, and then Desert Orchid, then Divine Rose, and Electric Bloom. So here are some comparison swatches with the blushes already in my collection. Now I did select these shades specifically because I thought they were more unique compared to my existing collection. So I didn't find any dupes, but there are some shades that are somewhat similar. First off, this is Zuma from the new NARS Orgasm on the Beach palette, and I would say this is relatively similar to Electric Bloom. So of course this is a satin finish rather than a demi-matte finish, but the shades are relatively similar. Next, I have a couple of comparisons with Divine Rose. So first off, on the bottom, we have the Surratt blush in Rougère, and that's definitely way deeper than Divine Rose, but they are somewhat similar in terms of being cool toned pinky berry shades. And then here I have Venetian Rose from M Cosmetics, which is a lot pinkier and warmer in tone compared to Divine Rose. And then over here I have Bellini from Ofra, which is way lighter and peachier than any of these shades. And then here I have the Patrick Ta She's Passionate blush, which is also lighter and pinkier than these shades. And then here we have Desert Orchid, and then swatched next to that I have Montezuma from the NARS Orgasm on the Beach collection. And Montezuma is definitely a lot more peachy in tone, whereas Desert Orchid has a much stronger bronze shade to it. And then here we have Faded Clementine from M Cosmetics, which is similar to Desert Orchid, but much more tangerine orange. And also the shimmer is a little bit more subtle. Last, here we have Nude Venus, and I did a lot of comparison swatches with Nude Venus in my other video, so definitely check that out for a more comprehensive review. But here I have swatched Orgasm from the NARS Orgasm on the Beach palette, which is way more pink and gold in shade rather than peach. And then finally I have the M Cosmetics Magic Hour blush, which is a lot lighter than Nude Venus. So for today's try on, I'm first going to just put these blushes on my bare skin. So I only have skincare and sunscreen on, and then a little bit of concealer around my eyes. And so I just want to see how this blush works on a slightly tacky surface. It's been really hot today where I live, so even though I have dry skin, I have sweated a little bit today, so we'll really put these blushes through the test. So first off, if you guys have watched my channel, you know that I'm a sucker for all things Divine Rose. So let's go into this Divine Rose blush. I have here my Sonia G Cheek Pro, so I'm just going to very lightly tap that into the blush and then sweep that all over this cheek. And this is my first experience with her demi-matte formula. Alrighty, so far so good. I'm not seeing any patchiness with this, even though my skin is definitely a little bit tacky at the moment. This is actually a really wearable shade. I was a little bit worried that because it's kind of a cooler toned mauve shade that it might not look very natural, but I feel like this is actually providing a really healthy natural flush. And I was really interested in the shade, both because I love Divine Rose and also because I don't actually have many cool toned blushes in my collection. Most of my blushes are quite warm, and so when I am doing a cool toned look, I do feel like I'm kind of limited in terms of what blushes I have available. So I'm really hoping that this will pair well with a lot of the cool toned looks that I love doing. So here we are with the blush built up on this cheek. And I will say, if I look very closely at it, I do see that it's not 100% smooth on my cheeks just because I do have some texture here. But considering that this is a matte blush and I don't have any powder on, I am quite impressed with how well this blended into the skin. Also, even though the shade is quite light, I think it works well on my medium skin tone. It definitely contrasts enough with my skin tone to show up on the cheeks. So next up, let's try this Desert Orchid shade. So again, I'm just gonna tap that same brush, which I've cleaned off, and then put this on this side of my face. So this one definitely looks a little bit more pigmented than the other one. And this is in the satin pearl finish rather than the demi matte. So I feel like the satin pearl finish definitely picks up more easily on the brush. It's slightly more powdery in texture, whereas the demi matte is a little bit harder pressed. Also, the satin pearl does blend in a little bit more easily, I would say. And even though it's shimmery, I feel like it almost disguises the texture to some extent in terms of how well it blends in. So if you compare these two sides, I would definitely say that it's easier to see some of the imperfections in my skin on this side compared to this side. Even though this side is shimmery, I feel like it has almost a slight blurring effect because of just how evenly the pigment is distributed. Whereas on this side, the matte does catch a little bit on the texture and imperfections on the cheek. I really love this shade of the Desert Orchid. It's just such a beautiful bronzy shade on the cheeks, and I feel like it provides a really nice, healthy flush without actually adding a lot of pigment, at least on my skin. I feel like this is just a little bit deeper and peachier than my natural skin tone, but there's also a slight pinkiness to the shade such that it does have a little bit of that natural flush going for it. So I really love this shade over here. So before I take these shades off my cheeks, I also just wanted to show you guys how this looks on the eyes. So I've gone in with my Urban Decay Primer Potion on both eyes. And to start off with my Chikuhodo blend brush, I'm gonna go into Divine Rose and just put this all over the crease area. So this is definitely a little bit harder to work with than an eyeshadow, but I think it is shearing out quite nicely. And then with my Chikuhodo eyeshadow brush, I'm just gonna go back in and put that all over the rest of my lid. And in general, I will definitely say that the demi matte finish is a little bit harder to pick up. So if you are worried about picking up too much product, or if you go in with a heavy hand, I feel like the demi matte blushes will prevent you from looking too blushed. And then with that same brush, I'm gonna just run that all over my lower lash line. Now I'm gonna do the same thing on the other eye with the Desert Orchid shade. I will say these pearl finish blushes do have a decent amount of shine. So if you're not a fan of having really glowy cheeks, or in this case eyes, I definitely would suggest going with the demi matte finishes instead. But this formula definitely blends out a lot more easily in comparison to the demi matte. So again, with my eyeshadow brush, I'm just gonna pack on the pigment a little bit more and then sweep that underneath the eye. So here we are with the first two shades, and I would say that I really love both of these shades. But Desert Orchid is definitely taking the cake in my book, in large part because I think this finish is just so much easier to work with and looks so much more perfected on the skin. Divine Rose is a really gorgeous shade, and I'm really glad I have this as an addition to my collection, but I do feel like it is a little bit harder to get a nice, smooth, even application of pigment, both on the eyes and on the cheeks. So that's the one caveat I would have with this product. That said, as Divine Rose is settling into my skin, I do feel like it looks really beautiful and is becoming more melded with my skin over time. So I think it's worth the extra little bit of effort. So I went ahead and removed both blushes. So now we can go in with Electric Bloom on my cheeks, and I don't have anything at all on them right now. So no skincare, makeup, anything at all. So hopefully, oh wow, oh my gosh, that really picked up a lot. Okay, so this was not at all my experience when I went in with Divine Rose. So I feel like Electric Bloom is definitely a lot more powdery. Oh wow, okay, I'm gonna have to distribute that tap on both sides. Let's see. It does seem to be sticking though. I think maybe I should have put down some powder or something. If you are any fairer than me in skin tone, I would definitely recommend being very, very careful with this blush. Wow, it is really quite pigmented. Alrighty, let's just see if I can blend this guy out. On the plus side, it does seem to be highly blendable. So when I first put this on, it seemed like it was really catching on some areas of my face that maybe hadn't fully dried down, but I feel like I am able to manipulate it with my brush, so that's good. I am looking very clown-like though, so definitely be careful with this. I think I should have just put this much higher on my face rather than going straight into the apples of my cheeks. So I'm gonna try to blend this outward and upward a little bit. Man, this is definitely quite a unique shade in my collection. The texture of this is also very unique. I feel like this feels very different than Divine Rose, even though they're both in the demi matte. So when I was doing the swatch, I found that it was really easy to kind of move the pigment around. So actually you guys might be able to see this right now, but you can kind of brush the powder away after you apply it onto the skin. Whereas I didn't find that to be as true for Divine Rose. So you see, as I put my finger over Divine Rose, a little bit of pigment does come off, but it mostly sticks. So that is something that is interesting about this Electric Bloom formula. I think the plus side of that is you can definitely continue to move around the product after you apply it to the face, but the minus side is just that it's not necessarily going to really settle into the skin, or at least based on the swatch, if you really pack it on, it might just kind of lay on top of the skin a little bit. So we'll see. I'm gonna try to just buff this in to see whether I can really get it to meld with my skin. Alrighty, there we go. So Electric Bloom on both cheeks, just on bare skin without any skincare or makeup. So based on this initial impression, I would definitely recommend going in with a very light hand. So possibly use more of a fluffy brush and just lightly sweep it across the cheeks, because it definitely picks up a lot of powder if you tap your brush into it. And that's in contrast with Divine Rose, which felt like a much more hard pressed powder, where I kind of had to dig in order to build up the layers. Electric Bloom comes off the pan very easily, but it also kind of comes off the face easily as well. So as you could see from today's application, I think that was good in the sense that you could definitely continue to manipulate it on your face, but it does make me a little bit concerned in terms of whether it might fade during the day. So I'll have to update you guys on that as I continue to try this out. Also, I'm really interested in seeing how this demi matte formula performs on top of powder, because it might be easier to blend in if you've powdered your base. So now I'm just gonna go in with my blend brush and try this out again on the eyes. So this time I do not have any primer on my eyes, so let's see how this fares. Also, one thing I do want to note about this shade is that I thought it would be really warm toned, given that it's described as a vivid coral. And indeed, in pan, I feel like it just looks like a really bright red. So in certain lights, it looks really warm toned and almost orangey. But in other light, it almost has more of a blue undertone to it, because it has that contrast with the skin that just kind of pops. So I am really fascinated by this shade. It is really, really different from any of my other blushes. So on this eye, I'm definitely seeing it stick a little bit, but that's fair. I don't have any primer on, and this is a blush, so I didn't expect the best blend. But in case you are interested in using these blushes as eyeshadows, I would say that Electric Bloom is the only one I've tried so far that has some struggles with the blendability. And then I'm also gonna sweep Electric Bloom underneath my eyes. And then since I haven't used Nude Venus at all this video, I'm gonna go in now with my GSN 9 brush and pick up some of Nude Venus just to put that all over my lid. Provide a little bit of shimmer. And then just for the sake of trying out more of these blushes as eyeshadow, I'm gonna go in with Desert Orchid on my mini booster from Sonia G and put this in the inner corner to see if that can maybe add a little bit of lightness there. Probably not light enough or shimmery enough to really provide inner corner highlight, but hey, might as well try it out. And I'm also just gonna brush some of that on the brow bone. I think it actually does a decent job of providing a bit of highlight to the brow bone area. And now I'm gonna go off, put on some eyeliner, and be back with my final thoughts. So here we have the final very blushed look. And in terms of my thoughts about these blushes, overall, I would say that I really enjoyed this collection and really enjoyed the diversity that these shades brought to my blush collection. Based on only using these products once, I would say at the moment, my favorite of the blushes has to be Desert Orchid. So it's both a unique addition to my collection in that I don't currently have this sort of bronzy rose toned shade. And also I love this formula. The satin pearl really just blends in seamlessly into the skin, provides a beautiful finish. And even though it has a glowy finish, which tends to emphasize texture on the skin, I do feel like it just applies so seamlessly such that it almost adds a blurring effect on the skin. So I'm a huge fan of this shade. I would say that my second favorite shade so far would be Nude Venus, and that peachy pinks are just one of my favorite go-to shades. So this is definitely way less unique, but it's just such a gorgeous shade, and it's in the same formula as Desert Orchid, which I found to work beautifully on the skin. And I didn't put Nude Venus on my face today, but if you do want to see a full review dedicated just to this blush, definitely check out my previous video. Next up we have Divine Rose, and I really love this shade. I think this is such a beautiful, cool toned pink addition to my collection, and is especially great since I've been really loving cool toned looks built around purple, pink, and blue eyeshadows. So I think this will go really well with those looks. I will say though, it was a little bit harder to pick up this product, so I had to build it up a lot on my cheeks. And also I will say that this didn't apply the most smoothly on my cheeks. That said, today I didn't powder, so it might be a lot better if you apply this over a powdered base. Finally, we have Electric Bloom, and I would say that the jury's still out on this shade. It is a really gorgeous, vibrant shade that will just bring life to any sort of look you add this to. So from that standpoint, I'm really excited to have this in my collection. That said, from a formula perspective, I'm not a huge fan of this so far. So similar to Divine Rose, this might apply better on top of powdered skin, so I'm gonna have to try that out another time. This formula though is quite different from the one in Divine Rose in that it is very powdery and easy to pick up. So you do have to be more careful with this, especially if you're my skin tone or lighter. Also, I'd say based on my experience with the swatch, you might have to be careful that you don't accidentally blend away layers of this pigment, because as I was trying to build up my swatch, anytime I put my finger on the swatch, it would pick up some of the product I had laid down before rather than just building up the opacity. So that's a little bit strange. I didn't find that to be a problem on my cheeks because I was trying to sheer out the product. But if you are, for example, much deeper in skin tone than me and you are trying to build up additional layers, the layers might not stick on top of each other very well. So those are my overall first impressions about these blushes. I would love to hear what you guys have thought about this collection. Have you picked up any shades? And if so, how have they performed for you? It was honestly really hard for me to narrow down the 9 just to these 4. And so I am still tempted by some of the other shades, though especially now that I also have the NARS Orgasm on the Beach palette. I feel like I'm swimming in blushes at the moment. And speaking of the NARS Orgasm on the Beach palette, if you guys are interested in this palette, I actually have a forthcoming video dedicated just to this palette. So definitely subscribe down below if you're interested in learning more about this palette. So that's it for today's video. Thank you all so much for joining me. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!